Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into a book today that I'm really excited about, The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of it.
It's kind of become a modern classic,
Okay.
and we've got a really interesting mix of stuff to work with.
Oh, cool.
Like we have summaries, analyses, even some outlines, so we can really get into the nitty-gritty.
Nice.
It's always fascinating to me how certain books just seem to capture the mood of a particular moment in time.
Yeah.
And The Power of Now definitely feels like one of those
Totally.
published back in 1997, right
Mm.
when the internet was starting to boom and everything was changing so fast.
It's true. It was like everything was on the verge of a major shift, and maybe it was.
Right. It's like we were on the edge of something huge, and in a way, maybe we still are with all the tech and AI stuff happening now.
I think there are some parallels for sure, and that feeling of anxiety about the future, it's something a lot of people are feeling now.
Absolutely. And it makes Tolle's message even more relevant. Like, how do we find peace in all this chaos?
Yeah. It's the question, isn't it?
And what's really interesting about Tolle is that he wasn't always this spiritual guru figure.
Yeah, didn't he go through some kind of like personal crisis or something?
He did, like a really profound one before he had this big awakening.
Yeah, I think I read about that.
And that makes it even more hopeful to me, like these kind of shifts are possible for anyone.
Right, like it gives you this sense that anyone can have these profound transformations.
Exactly, and that's a big part of the message of the power of that. Now, I think that this potential is within all of us.
It's not just some exclusive club for enlightened beings,
Yeah.
right?
But before we get too deep into all that,
Okay.
it's important to clarify that this book isn't just about mindfulness or enjoying the little things.
I was just thinking that. It's a lot deeper than that, right?
It is. It's really a deep dive into how our minds work.
And how that impacts everything.
Exactly. How our thoughts and beliefs shape our entire experience of life.
Right. It's like a whole philosophy of how to live.
Yeah. And one of the key ideas that kept coming up in the material is this concept of living in the now.
Okay, that's like a classic Tolle thing, right?
But it's so easy to oversimplify. It's way more than just like smelling the roses or enjoying a sunset.
Yeah, you can't just like put on a mindfulness app and call it a day.
Exactly. So what is Tolle really saying here? What does he mean by living in the now?
Well, his point is that our minds are hardly ever actually in the present moment. We're either replaying the past, worrying about the future, or just lost in this constant stream of thoughts.
It's true. It's like our minds are always somewhere else.
And Tolle has a name for all that mental chatter. He calls it the ego.
Okay, the ego. So it's like this inner voice that's constantly narrating our lives.
Exactly. But the thing is, that voice is often full of anxiety and judgment and fear.
It's like it's running the show, but it's not a very good director, is it?
Not really. It keeps us preoccupied with thoughts that don't actually serve us.
Like it's focused on the wrong things. It's missing the whole point.
And that's what keeps us from truly experiencing life as it unfolds.
I get it. It's like when you're so busy taking pictures for Instagram that you don't actually enjoy the moment you're trying to capture.
Perfect example. That's the ego at work, constantly comparing, seeking validation, never satisfied with what is.
And Tolle is saying that this ego-driven mind, it actually creates a false sense of self.
Right. It's a self that's based on all these external things, like our achievements, possessions, our roles and labels, even our past experiences.
So it's not who we really are at our core.
He's saying it's a construct, it's not our true nature.
Whoa, that's pretty mind-blowing.
It is. It makes you question everything.
So if the ego isn't our true self, then what is?
That's the big question, isn't it? And Tolle suggests it's a deeper consciousness, something that we can access by being present, by quieting the mind and connecting to the stillness within.
It's like there's this whole other dimension of ourselves that we're usually not even aware of.
Exactly, and he calls this our true self.
So it's a state of being that's free from all the limitations and anxieties of the ego.
It's about tapping into this inner peace that's always there, beneath the surface.
It's like there's this whole other way of being in the world that most of us aren't even aware of.
And it's not some mystical, far-off thing. It's accessible to all of us right here, right now.
That's a really powerful idea, and it makes you wonder how much of our suffering is actually self-created.
Oh, for sure. I think that's a huge part of it, just the way we think.
Just the way we get caught up in our own minds.
It's like we're our own worst enemies sometimes.
And that leads us to another key concept from The Power of Now.
Okay, what's that?
The pain body.
Ooh, that sounds intense.
It is, I mean, the term itself is kind of ominous, right?
It is. Kind of makes you cringe a little.
But I think it's really important to
Right,
understand.
because what is it exactly?
Well, The way I understand it, the pain body is like this reservoir of all our unresolved emotional pain.
Okay, so it's like all the baggage we carry around.
Exactly. It's the accumulation of all the traumas.
The heartbreaks, disappointments, anger, resentment, all that heavy stuff.
All the things that we haven't fully processed or healed from.
Right, and it kind of festers inside us.
And the scary part is that we're often not even aware of it.
It's like this hidden force that's influencing us.
Exactly. It lurks beneath the surface, waiting to be triggered by certain situations or people.
It's why we sometimes overreact to things that seem small.
Or find ourselves caught in these patterns of negativity or self-sabotage.
Like we're acting out of character, but it's really this deeper pain that's driving us.
It's like some invisible force is pushing our buttons and we don't even know why.
Exactly, and that's the pain body at work. It distorts our perceptions.
Yeah, and it clouds our judgment.
It influences our reactions, and ultimately it prevents us from experiencing true peace and happiness.
It's like having this wound that keeps getting re-injured because we haven't allowed it to heal.
That's a good analogy. It just keeps coming back to haunt us.
So the question is, how do we deal with this pain body? Do we try to ignore it, push it down?
That's what a lot of us try to do, right? Just pretend it's not there.
Right, but I'm sensing that Tolle's saying that's not the answer.
Yeah, he's definitely not about denial.
So what does he suggest?
He says the first step is to become aware of it, to really acknowledge it,
To shine a light on it.
to recognize when it's being triggered and how it's affecting us.
So it's about becoming more conscious of what's driving our reactions.
Exactly. And this awareness is crucial.
Because it allows us to start separating ourselves from the pain body.
It's like we create some distance between us and the pain.
We realize that we are not our pain, we are not our past.
It's a really powerful shift in perspective.
It's like we're reclaiming our power, our sense of agency.
And that's when true healing can begin.
This is where mindfulness comes in, right? Seems like the key to everything we've been talking about.
It is, but it's important to understand what Tolle means by mindfulness.
Okay, because it's become such a buzzword lately, it's easy to misunderstand.
Totally. It's not just about meditation or relaxation techniques.
It's a way of being, right?
He sees it as a way of being present in every moment, of observing our thoughts and feelings and sensations without judgment.
It's about becoming the observer of our own minds.
Exactly, not getting swept away by the current of thoughts.
So it's like creating space between ourselves and our experience.
Which allows us to choose how we respond rather than just reacting habitually.
Wow, that's a huge shift, right? It's like we're taking back control of our inner world.
It is. It's about reclaiming our power.
And Tolle's saying this is where true freedom lies.
It's the ability to step back from the drama of our minds.
And access a deeper sense of peace and clarity.
Even in the midst of challenging situations.
That's such a powerful concept, and it makes me think about how often I react to things in ways that I later regret.
We all do it. It's human nature.
Like, if I had been able to create that space to observe my anger instead of being consumed by it, maybe things would have turned out differently.
It's about responding rather than reacting, and that's not always easy.
It's not. But it seems like the key to living a more peaceful and fulfilling life.
It is, and it can transform our relationships, too.
Right, because when we're more mindful of our own reactions, we can start to see the other person with more compassion.
It's like we're not so quick to judge or blame.
It's like we're creating space for understanding and connection.
And that's essential for any healthy relationship.
Okay, so we've got mindfulness,
Right.
which helps us to become aware of the pain body.
And create some distance from it.
So we're not constantly being triggered and reacting from that place of hurt.
It's like we're starting to heal those old wounds.
And that brings us to another concept that came up a lot in the material: acceptance.
Okay, so how does that fit in? Because sometimes acceptance can feel like giving up, right?
Exactly, like if you accept a negative situation, doesn't that mean you're just resigning yourself to it?
That's a common misconception.
But I'm pretty sure Tolle is saying something different.
Yeah, he's definitely not about passivity or resignation.
So what does he mean by acceptance?
He sees it as a radical act of letting go of resistance.
Okay, so it's not about liking the situation or agreeing with it. It's about acknowledging the reality of what is.
Exactly. Without judgment or wishing things were different.
It's more about making peace with what we can't control.
And that doesn't mean we become passive or inactive.
Right. It's not about giving up. It's about choosing our battles
And when we stop resisting what is, we actually free up a tremendous amount of energy.
that we can then use for more constructive purposes.
It's like we're not wasting energy on fighting reality.
And that allows us to respond to situations more effectively
It's about becoming more aligned with the flow of life.
instead of constantly trying to swim upstream.
Exactly. And that's where true peace and power come from.
I'm starting to see how all these concepts, mindfulness, acceptance, the ego, the pain body,
It's all interconnected, isn't it?
it is. It's like they're pieces of a puzzle that, when put together, reveal a path to a more peaceful and fulfilling way of being.
It's like a whole new way of looking at life.
And it's not just a theory. Tolle offers practical techniques for putting these ideas into practice.
Okay, so how do we actually do it? Like, what are some of the things we can start doing to bring these ideas into our everyday lives?
That's a great question, and I'm really excited to explore those techniques in more detail.
Me too, because it all sounds really great in theory.
But the real magic is in the application.
Totally, it's about making it real.
So let's take a deeper dive into those practical tools in our next segment.
Sounds good, I'm ready. You know what's interesting? Tolle uses a lot of stories and examples to illustrate these concepts.
Oh, I like that. It makes it more relatable.
It does, and there's one that comes to mind about this guy who was super attached to his possessions.
Oh, I think I remember that one. What happened?
So he goes through a series of really tough events, job loss, his home gets damaged, and he ends up having to sell almost everything he owns.
That's rough. I can't even imagine.
It's a lot to handle, and he was understandably devastated.
Yeah, losing so much so quickly, that would be incredibly painful.
It was, but here's where it gets interesting. He goes through this process of surrender.
Okay, because he kind of has to, right? There's not much else he can do.
Exactly. He's forced to confront his attachment to all these material things.
And what happens?
He realizes that his possessions don't actually define his worth.
That's a big realization.
It is, and he starts to see that true happiness doesn't depend on external circumstances.
So it's like through this experience of loss, he actually finds a deeper sense of freedom.
Exactly. It's counterintuitive, right? You'd think losing everything would make you miserable.
You would, but it's like this paradox.
It is. It's like sometimes letting go is the only way to gain true control.
Control over our inner state, not necessarily the external events.
Right, because those are often out of our control anyway.
This makes me think about how often we cling to things that might actually be holding us back.
Oh, totally. And it's not just possessions.
Right, it could be ideas, beliefs, even relationships.
Anything that we're afraid to let go of, even if it's not serving us.
It's like we're so afraid of the unknown, we'd rather hold on to something familiar, even if it's causing us pain.
And that brings us to another important concept from The Power of Now.
Okay, hit me with it.
The distinction between pain and suffering.
Oh yeah, that was a big one. I'm ready to unpack that.
So Tully's saying that pain is inevitable. It's part of life.
Right, we're all going to experience pain at some point. Physical, emotional, the pain of loss.
It's just part of being human.
But suffering, he's saying that's optional.
Exactly. It's not the pain itself that causes suffering. It's our resistance to it.
It's all the stories we tell ourselves about the pain.
All the negativity, the blame, the self-criticism.
It's like the pain is the initial injury, but suffering is all the stuff we pile on top of it.
That's a perfect way to put it. It's like when you stub your toe, right?
Ouch. Yeah, I can feel it.
The initial pain is sharp, but then you keep replaying it in your mind.
And focusing on how much it hurts. And getting mad at yourself for not being more careful.
But that's what prolongs the suffering.
So it's not the stub toe, it's all the mental anguish we create around it.
Exactly. And just like we can learn to care for a physical wound
We can learn to care for our emotional wounds as well.
through mindfulness and acceptance.
Okay, that makes sense, but how do we actually do that? How do we apply mindfulness to emotional pain
It starts with awareness, noticing the pain, acknowledging it.
without judgment?
Right. We're not pushing it away. We're not trying to numb it.
We're creating space for it. We're allowing ourselves to feel it.
It sounds counterintuitive, I know, but it's the only way to truly heal.
It's like when you try to hold a beach ball underwater,
The more you resist, the more it wants to pop back up.
and it's exhausting.
It is, and it doesn't actually work.
So we're not trying to suppress the pain or pretend it's not there. We're actually leaning into it
In a way, yeah, but we're doing it with awareness.
with compassion for ourselves.
Exactly, and as we do that, the pain starts to lose its grip on us.
It's like we're shifting our relationship to the pain.
From one of fear and resistance to one of acceptance and even curiosity.
Okay, I'm starting to get it. So it's not about making the pain go away. It's about changing how we relate to it.
And that changes everything.
It's a subtle shift, but it seems really powerful.
It is, and it can lead to a much deeper sense of peace and inner strength.
This makes me think about that story of the man who lost everything.
Yeah, it sounds like he went through a period of intense pain.
But he didn't let it turn into prolonged suffering.
He chose to surrender to the situation, and through that surrender, he found a new perspective.
A new source of strength.
And that's what's possible when we embrace acceptance.
We're not denying the pain. We're just choosing not to let it define us.
We're acknowledging it, we're honoring it, and then we're moving forward.
It's like we're turning the pain into a teacher rather than a tormentor.
That's a great way to put it, and I think that's a key takeaway from the power of now.
That even painful experiences can be catalysts for growth.
They can show us our strength, our resilience.
They can help us to connect with a deeper part of ourselves.
And ultimately, they can lead us to a more authentic and fulfilling life.
Okay, we've talked about surrender, the difference between pain and suffering, and how to apply mindfulness to emotional pain.
It's a lot, but it's all interconnected.
It is, and it's all so incredibly valuable. But before we get too carried away, I'm realizing we have limited time in this deep dive.
Yeah, it's flying by.
Is there anything else from the power of now that you think would be particularly helpful for our listeners to know?
You know, one thing that really stood out to me was Tolle's emphasis on the power of the present moment.
Okay, that makes sense, but it's also one of the hardest things to do, right?
It is, our minds are always somewhere else.
So how do we actually shift our focus to the now? Like, what are some practical tips?
Well, Tolle offers a number of techniques, and they all revolve around cultivating mindful awareness.
Okay, that's a good starting point.
And one of the simplest but most effective is paying attention to our senses.
So instead of getting lost in our thoughts, we focus on what we can see, hear, touch, taste, smell.
Exactly. It's about bringing our full attention to the sensory experience of the present moment.
Like really immersing ourselves in the here and now.
Right. Notice the colors, the shapes, the sounds, the textures, the scents.
It's like hitting the reset button on our minds and tuning into what's actually happening around us.
It is, and it's something you can practice anytime, anywhere.
Like a mini meditation you can do throughout the day.
Exactly. And the more you do it, the easier it becomes to access that state of present moment awareness.
Okay, I like that. It's simple but powerful.
It is, and it can really help to break free from those mental loops that keep us stuck in the past or future.
This is making me think about something else we touched on earlier, the unmanifested.
Oh, yeah, that's a whole other layer.
It felt a bit mystical and abstract at first.
It does. It's hard to grasp with the rational mind.
But now I'm wondering if it connects to this idea of being present.
I think you're onto something. Tolle suggests that the present moment is actually the gateway to the unmanifested.
Okay, so it's like by cultivating present moment awareness, we're not just reducing stress and anxiety, we're actually opening ourselves up to a deeper level of reality.
That's exactly what he's saying. He describes the unmanifested as this realm of pure consciousness.
That exists beyond our thoughts, emotions, perceptions.
It's like the source of all creation, the ground of being.
Whoa, okay, that's pretty mind-blowing.
It is. It makes you realize how limited our usual perception of reality is.
Like we're just scratching the surface.
Exactly. And Tolle's saying that the unmanifested is a source of infinite creativity, wisdom, peace.
It's the wellspring of our true being, he says.
And it's accessible to each of us.
Right here, right now.
Not in some distant future or far-off place.
I love that it suggests that we have so much more potential than we realize.
We do, but we have to learn how to tap into it.
And the key is the present moment.
It's the only place where we can truly connect with that deeper reality.
This is all starting to click for me. It's like the power of now is offering a whole new way of perceiving and experiencing the world.
It is. It's like a paradigm shift.
A way that's free from the limitations of the ego and the pain body.
It's about waking up to our true nature.
And it's not just a theory. Tolle provides practical tools to make this shift.
Right. It's about putting these principles into practice.
And it's not about becoming some enlightened being or living in a cave.
It's about making small but consistent choices in our everyday lives.
To be present, to be aware, to choose peace over reactivity, acceptance over resistance, love over fear.
It's about showing up for ourselves and for others in a more conscious and compassionate way.
This is all incredibly insightful, and it's making me want to revisit the power of now with fresh eyes.
No, me too. I feel like I'm just scratching the surface.
But before I get too carried away, I'm realizing we're almost out of time for this deep dive.
It always goes by so fast.
It does. But before we wrap up, I'd love to hear your final thoughts on the power of now.
Okay, well, Well, for me, it's that reminder that happiness isn't something we have to chase in the future.
Right, like it's not some destination we're trying to reach.
Exactly. It's a state of being that's available right now.
It's about accessing that inner peace,
That stillness Tully talks about.
that sense of wholeness that doesn't depend on anything external.
Right. It's not about what you have or what you achieve.
It's about who you are at your core.
And that requires us to become aware of our minds,
Yeah, all those patterns and habits of thinking,
the ways we cling to the past, worry about the future.
all that negative self-talk that we get caught up in.
And that's where those practical techniques come in. The mindfulness, the breathing exercises.
Are there tools to help us dismantle those patterns?
To create space for something deeper to emerge.
And one technique that really caught my attention was what Tolle calls detaching from our thoughts.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
So what's the idea behind that?
Well, it's about recognizing that we're not our thoughts.
Right, because it's so easy to get caught up in them and think that they define us.
Exactly. And that can cause a lot of suffering.
Because our thoughts aren't always accurate or helpful.
They can be distorted by our fears, our insecurities, all sorts of things.
It's like our minds have this negativity bias
Right. Always focusing on what's wrong.
instead of what's right.
And Tully's saying we don't have to believe everything our minds tell us.
We have a choice.
We can start to create distance from our thoughts, to observe them without getting swept away.
So how do we actually do that?
Yeah.
How do we detach from thoughts that feel so real and so powerful?
It starts with mindfulness, with noticing the thoughts as they arise.
Without judgment.
Right, just observing them with a sense of curiosity.
Like we're watching clouds passing by in the sky.
Exactly. And as we practice this, we start to see that our thoughts are constantly changing.
Coming and going.
The sky, our true nature, remains vast and unchanging.
I love that analogy. It's so reassuring.
It reminds us that there's something deeper within us that's beyond the fluctuations of our thoughts.
It's like the ocean. The surface may be choppy with waves.
But the depths remain calm and serene.
And Tolle suggests that this is how we connect with the unmanifested.
Right, by accessing this deeper awareness, this inner stillness.
So all those practices we've been talking about,
Yeah.
the mindful breathing, the acceptance of emotions,
They're all pathways to accessing that realm of pure consciousness.
that exists beyond our thinking minds.
It's like they're different doors leading to the same destination.
It's making me think about those moments when we're fully present in nature
Like watching a sunset.
or listening to the waves crashing on the shore.
There's a sense of expansiveness and peace that washes over us.
And it's effortless. It just happens when we let go of our thinking minds.
And Tolle would say those are glimpses of the unmanifested,
Reminders of our true nature.
which is pure consciousness, pure being.
This is all so inspiring, and it's making me want to explore those pathways even further.
Me too. It's like a whole new world opens up when we start to tap into this.
It does, but unfortunately, we're just about out of time for this deep dive.
It always goes by so fast.
It does. But before we wrap up, I'd love to hear your final thoughts on the power of now.
Well, what really struck me is that reminder that the power to transform our lives is within us.
Right. It's not something outside of us. It's not something we have to go searching for.
It's here in each and every moment.
And it's a choice we can make to be present, to be aware, to be kind.
To choose love over fear.
That's a beautiful message, and I think it's something we all need to hear.
Especially in these times.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the power of now, I encourage you to reflect on what you've learned.
What insights resonated with you?
What practices are you going to try? Where do you see the greatest potential for applying these ideas in your own life?
Because the journey to peace and fulfillment starts with a single step.
A step into the present moment.
And until next time,
Stay curious, stay mindful, and keep diving deep into the world of knowledge and wisdom.